Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight we have our Halloween fall SCARE-A-THON, and I have 3 stories of outdoors people, hikers and campers that have pretty frightening experiences. It's pretty intense. Camping is intense. That's next. Okay guys, I am up near Monitor Pass, California. It's a pretty high pass and then it levels out at the top and there's these stands of aspen trees. I thought this would be perfect for a fall Halloween SCARE-A-THON. Never done this before, but it should be a lot of fun. And we have a beer tonight. This is called the Hop Raider IPA. It looks like it's a tribute to the Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is by the New Belgium Brewing Company, and this is part of their Voodoo Ranger series there. That is our beer for tonight. And I am drinking 1 beer for 3 stories, but I do have some other kinds of drinks for my other stories. So, woo! That filled up fast. So our story takes place in Northern California along the Eel River near the Redwoods. In fact, it is in the Redwoods. It's Jedediah Smith State Park and Reserve. This park was established in 1939, 10,000 acres of giant redwoods, ferns, the river going through it, just amazing deep forests. I want to go up there sometime and check it out. It looks awesome. These trees can live from 800 to 1,500 years, 250 to 350 feet tall, which is amazing, amazing stuff. So back in 2013, a couple, Brenda and Steve, made their way from New York to San Francisco on a business trip. Steve was an engineer, Brenda was a graphic designer, and she would join him on trips to California when he did business there in Silicon Valley. And when they had time off after business was done, they would go and explore. And they usually didn't have a lot of time to explore too far or too much, but this time he took some extra days and they were going to go see Alcatraz, take Highway 1 up the coast, and then catch the 101, work their way over to the 101 and go through and stay at a resort, and then eventually work their way to Redding and take a flight out from Redding and head back after their week was over. So they stayed at the Redwood River Resort and Pub. Really cool looking place. I looked it up online. It's along the Eel River, just south of the Jedediah Smith Redwoods State Park. And it has cabins, a restaurant. I think they do weddings there. It looks like a nice resort. So they rented a cabin, just loved it, and Brenda said that they would have stayed there a lot longer had they not had the experience that they were going to have. They got up early the next day to do a hike. Got in the car, drove up to the Jedediah Smith Redwoods, got some good maps, got on the trail. We're hiking about an hour and a half into the Redwoods, having just a great time. Brenda had just picked up a new set of Pentax binoculars, and while they're hiking, they're passing them back and forth, looking up into the trees, checking out the forest, and they came to this big curve in the trail that was kind of curving back towards the trailhead kind of thing. And they could see on the other side of the forest there some blue sky, and it looked like maybe like a drop-off or something. So they got off the trail and hiked about 50 yards off the trail towards this kind of blue break in the trees there. And they could see, once they got there, this really nice view looking down towards a clearing or a meadow. It was almost like it's an overlook. Great place to see a sunset. And they were standing there over a log. And Steve had the binoculars this particular time, and he started scanning down below the meadow, and then he paused. And Brenda was kind of looking at him like something caught his attention. And she said, "Hey honey, what are you looking at?" And he didn't say anything. And she said it again, "Honey, what are you looking at?" And then she's asked the third time, and he said, and he was whispering, he said, here, take a look. And he handed the binoculars over to Brenda, and then she held them up, and then she was looking, kind of waiting for him to tell her what to look for. And he said, there, down by the clearing, on the edge where the trees are, along the tree line, look there. And she followed the meadow along the edge, and then she saw a shape. And it looked like a person. It was on 2 feet, but it was a dark shape. And she paused and she looked at it, and her first thought was, how did a hiker get way down there, way off the trail, way down there? And then she looked, focused in more, and she could see that it was all dark. It looked like its back was facing them, and she could see somewhat of an outline of some hair, like it was a Bigfoot. And it had its back to them, and it was reaching up and effortlessly pulling bark off this tree, like it was looking for rodents or insects or maybe even birds. And she's looking at it, just transfixed on it with the binoculars. And then Steve was asking her now, do you see it? And she didn't say anything. She was so transfixed on it. And he said, honey, do you see it? And she goes, yeah, I see it. And just then, Steve reached over to grab the binoculars out of her hand, and it startled Brenda. And she dropped him, and it hit the log that was below them, made a pretty loud sound. And normally, Brenda would be a little freaked out that she dropped her brand new Pentax binoculars. She was so focused on what she was looking at down in the meadow, she didn't even care about the binoculars. They both reached down at the same time to grab the binoculars, and they stood back up, and then they could hear, right at that moment, down below in the clearing, this really loud howl, screech. It just totally broke the silence, and they were both shaken by this. They looked at each other, and then they looked back, and this time they didn't need the binoculars because they knew where they were looking. They could see the shape down there, and they're looking down there, and they see the shape, and its position was changed. It was turned around, and they could see it moving back and forth like this. And then Brenda said they could see the arms of it go up and like start flailing like this. It screamed again, this loud howl screech. And then the most frightening thing, it dropped to all fours and started galloping across the meadow from the tree line. And Brenda said she was just marveled at how agile it was and how fast it was and how large it was. And it was just galloping right across the meadow. And then it got to the base of the hill, the overlook they were on, and the trees kind of blocked it, but now they could hear it down below coming up through the brush towards them. she said, it's coming right for us. And she was just in absolute fear. She couldn't even move. She was in so much fear. And Steve said, we need to leave now. And she didn't respond to that. She was just standing there frozen. And he said, honey, let's go, let's go. And he grabbed her by the arm and he yanked her, and she spun around, and they both started running back to this big corner where the trail was, and they could hear from behind them coming up the slope, the brush breaking like it was a rhinoceros coming through the brush. And Steve said, don't look back, just keep running. And they were running through the brush, getting close to the trail, and just when they were about to hit the trail, they could hear the sound starting to, almost like it was turning and starting to fade and head back down. And they just felt this fear and then just slight relief that it wasn't in direct pursuit of them anymore. And they got to the trail and started jogging back to the trailhead. Fortunately, they had the maps and they knew exactly how to get back to the trailhead. They got to the trailhead and they saw some other people in the parking lot, and they were just relieved, like, oh my God, that was the scariest thing we had ever experienced in our lives, is what she said. And they got in the car, got their gear in there, and they just got the car going, started pulling out of the parking lot, and they just were amazed at what they had seen and heard, and just grateful to be moving out. They got back to the cabin, spent one more night there, but they didn't do any more hiking. They worked their way to Redding, took the flight out. And from that time forward, they'd always had this really serious interest in knowing more about Bigfoot. They read books, saw documentaries, even went to a convention. And just this really kind of intense interest in this since they had this experience. And Brenda mentioned that as much as we have this interest about this subject, definitely something we do not want to experience again. There's the first story for the night. Okay, moved my location for story number 2, and I have my next drink, which is a Sioux City sarsaparilla. Check that out. It says it's the granddaddy of all root beers, so pretty cool. I also got my jack-o'-lantern with me tonight. I got a little headlight in the back, duct taped on there for added effect. Shows how high-tech I am. I'm very high-tech. So, here we go. Oh yeah, root beer. It's still a beer, right? I got beer number 2 here, except it's a root beer. That is tasty and it's fun. I like that. Cheers. So, okay, so story number 2. This again takes place in Northern California, but this time it's more on the eastern side of California, northeastern, near the town of Susanville. And Susanville is on the Highway 36, and if you follow Highway 36 to the west, you'll go to Lassen National Park. Beautiful national park. I love Lassen National Park. It's like Yellowstone, except it doesn't have quite as many thermal features and geysers and things like that, but it is very active with mud pots, some hot springs, things like that. It's pretty cool. This took place in August of 2022, so this is a really recent story. There was a couple named Bill and Karen who lived for most of their lives in Susanville, lived there about 30 years. And they were very active camping, and they knew the area and they knew the wildlife, and they loved to go camping. And this particular summer, which is last summer, they found along this Highway 36, about 12 miles west of town, a small one campsite campground, just an old camp spot. And they're on a day trip, and they found this dirt road, and they followed it back into the forest, and then it dead-ended. And it was just a nice spot to camp. Didn't really have a designated fire pit. There was some rocks there, and they thought this would be a great place to come back to and camp. And they normally camp about a mile or so back east down the road at a larger campground, and they'd camp there about 10, 12 years, something like that. And they thought, let's give this one a try. So August of this year, got all their camping gear, got their large Mastiff dog, and Bill and Karen took this Highway 36, took the right turn off the road on this dirt road, followed it back about a half mile, and it's very thick forest back there. And they were really excited. It was about 6:30 at night, and they had a camper van, let the dog out, and he was a very chill dog. It was a Mastiff, pretty good sized dog. And he would like to lay in the dirt and relax. And Karen started setting things up, and Bill got the stove going, Coleman stove, and he had a small table to work with. And then he broke out the Coleman lantern, and they set up their camp. And they were going to sleep in the camper van, but they had enough stuff to set up to do a little work to get them where they needed to be. So Bill was cooking some dinner. He had a couple of steaks going for them, had the skillet, had the Coleman lantern on the table that he'd set up. It was almost dark. Karen was making the beds in the camper van, and for whatever reason, their dog wanted to go into the van, just rest inside the van. And normally he would sit by the campfire even after dark, and they had a campfire going. Bill finished off the steaks, and he brought him over to Karen, and right then, Karen heard what sounded like some teenage boys down the mountain, kind of down where the highway is. And they were hooting, hollering, howling. And she thought, that is really strange. And I'm on a pretty good slope here, and it would be like looking straight down here and hearing some noises down there. And she said, hey, honey, Bill, did you hear that? And he didn't hear anything, and it was quiet again. They were both quiet, and they were both just listening. And then it started up again. Same location, this hooting, hollering, yelling kind of thing. And at first, Bill didn't know what to make of it. And then he said, something's not right. It doesn't sound human. And then Karen looks at Bill, and she had some wide eyes, and she was just thinking, okay, this is getting serious, because they knew what the wildlife was in that area. Coyotes, foxes, mountain lions. They know what those sounds are. And just then, behind them, maybe 100 yards, they heard this really scary growl howl, opposite direction. And Bill almost dropped the plate of food he had in his hand. Then right after that, they heard on the opposite direction along the ridge where the power pole lines were, this time a faint howl. And it was almost like they were in the middle of this triangle of communication between whatever these creatures were. They assumed it was Sasquatch at that point. And they just looked at each other, and they knew, we got to get out of here. Then Karen said, honey, let's just break this down and get the heck out of here. Karen opened up the van to start just throwing stuff in there, and the dog was inside just shaking. And she thought, this is crazy. It's pitch black. We're hearing sounds all around us. The dog is freaking out. We have no idea what this really is. And so Bill puts out the campfire, shuts off the lantern. It was almost like the scariest time because now it was dark in there except for the light inside the van. They got everything in the van in really short order, closed the van up, dogs in the back, started driving out, pitch black, very concerned about heading back down the mountain where they initially heard the sounds. Didn't see anything. Got down into a clearing, could see better, still didn't see anything down there. Very relieved about that. Took a left, paralleled the highway, and then took a right and got back on Highway 36. Drove to town, got home, and they were just in shock when they got home, like, what the heck happened? That was crazy. We've never had anything like that while we've been camping our entire lives. And they've camped a lot. They knew all the sounds, they knew the animals. Never even had problems with bears. And they always felt like since this last summer that we might not be camping for a while. And they really felt from that night that they were haunted by that experience. Story number 2. Okay, so this is our third location for the third story and our third drink. I'm just kind of going for it tonight. Happy Halloween, by the way. Frosty Vanilla Root Beer. Check that one out. Now I'm going to be all sugared up. This one says it was a twist off, and fortunately it is. So, and this one we are going to pour in the cup here. So technically it's my third beer in a row here, but it's a root beer, so. It is getting dark really quick, by the way, too, so just FYI. Okay, so this next story takes place in 1982. This is a little older now. There was a young man, 15 years old, his name was Darren, and he grew up in a hunting and fishing family. He shot his first deer at age 10. His dad was a decorated Navy war veteran from World War II. In fact, he served on the Yorktown during the Battle of Midway. And the reason he mentioned that in his encounter was it gives you an idea of the kind of family that he grew up in, as they were taught to fear nothing. He grew up with 6 other brothers, and he was the youngest of 7. He was the 7th one. He had never told this story to anyone else, ever. So that November in 1982, he and his father went hunting in a place called the Jefferson Proving Grounds. It was an Army proving grounds in southeast Indiana. It's now known as the Big Oaks Wildlife Preserve. It's 50,000 acres in southeast Indiana. And to go hunting there, they had to watch a video and fill out an acknowledgement of danger because it used to be a military location. And so they decided to have their tree stands just be ground stands where they sat up next to a large oak tree. They started out hunting at 5 a.m. Each had their own tree. Dad went off to his tree, and then Darren sat up against this oak tree, had his 12-gauge shotgun. He's 15 years old. And he's sitting there waiting, see if a deer is going to show up, see what's going to happen. And about 10 o'clock in the morning, he decides to have his sandwich that his mom made. Ate that. And he was relaxing, just sitting there in the beautiful fall colors. Nice warm day. It was about then, it was about maybe mid-50s. and he falls asleep. And he was awoken sometime later, he wasn't sure how long it had been, by the rustling of footsteps coming through the forest towards his tree. And he immediately thought, well, that's probably my dad coming to check on me. So he paused, and then he looked around the tree, and to his shock, he saw a large ape-like creature standing not 30 feet away from him. It didn't see him, it wasn't looking at him. And he, just for a moment, he saw that it was over 8 feet tall. The color of wheat, it was what he said, really kind of blended in with the forest really well. Weighed maybe 400, 450 pounds. Had a flat face and a wide nose, kind of a high forehead. And it appeared to be checking where he had put some urine down to attract deer. And then he slowly pulled his head back and immediately started shaking about what he had seen. Just frightening. And he was grateful the wind had shifted, because whatever this thing was, most likely a Sasquatch, Bigfoot, if it had smelled him or sensed him, he felt in his heart that he would probably have been a missing person. And whatever that means was something like that. He waited what seemed like the longest time. He could still hear it on the other side of the tree. And he's just sitting there shaking, had his gun. He was grateful he had his shotgun with him, but he didn't think it would do a lot to this large creature he had seen. 12 gauge, he thought maybe it'd piss him off or something. But again, he was grateful he had something. Then he heard this almost like a snort, big sniff, like a, I don't even want to do it, but it'd be kind of like that. And he just sat there frozen with fear and waited. Nothing happened. And it was just the scariest thing because it was so quiet. He thought maybe it was creeping up on the other side of the tree. Then he heard it faintly walking away until he couldn't hear it anymore. And he let out a deep sigh of relief as he sat there, and he waited another 15 minutes before he got up and searched for his dad. He found his dad after about a 20-minute search. Grateful to have found his dad. And he told his dad he had a stomach ache. He wasn't feeling good. I think I want to go home now. And his dad said, okay, that's fine. And so they drove home. And years later, he remembered that the colonel that was in charge of the Jefferson Proving Grounds would say, while they were doing this training video and the information before they could go hunting, he would say, no cameras. And if you don't know what it is, don't shoot. And he would always add after that, besides, you don't really want to know what's out there. And whenever Darren thought about this story, it's a very short story, I get it, but it changed him, and he would just get the chills thinking about what he had actually seen. He didn't just hear something, but he saw something very specific, and it was a Sasquatch. And that is our Halloween third story of the night. And I think we're going to beat the pitch black darkness that I usually hike out in. But I got a little ways to hike out, not too far, maybe a quarter mile. But it's mostly sagebrush as I'm in a big open alpine country up here. I don't know if you'd consider this a meadow, but it's just a vast area that I'm in. Pretty awesome. But, well, happy Halloween, you guys. I appreciate you guys watching my channel. You guys are awesome. You guys leave me some great comments. And it really inspires me to keep going and do what I do. And I love doing this. That is tasty. What is that? Frosty. Let's get a little troll on it. It's kind of funny. So we will see you next time. And as always, keep hiking.